Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Corelli. Tonight's episode is going to be one that's very unique. It's going to be something that we don't normally do, and something that I think will be very enlightening. And it comes from some inspiration from some requests and questions from listeners. So before we get to that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping if you don't mind. If you're new to this podcast, we are on the back end, starting the second end of season two. And season two of this podcast is here for those who are struggling with spiritual warfare or demonic attack. If you have questions about demons, if you have questions about spirituality, about God, we want to offer you that help or at least try to answer your questions. If you are somebody who's in the midst of a spiritual attack, we'd love to hear from you as well. And we can actually use your story on the podcast to help others, as well as try to get you the help that you need. So if you have something going on that you'd like to run by us, if you have questions, if you have a story, if you'd like to be interviewed on the podcast, please reach out to us by going to Anthony at thestruggleseries.com. That is Anthony, common spelling, at thestruggleseries.com, and send us an email. If you have a letter written, you can attach that to the email. If you just want to write it in the body of the email, that's well. And if you'd like us to contact you, just give us a little bit of background and one of the team members will reach out to you. I promise you, we read through every letter we receive, and we just want to try to get you the help that you need. Now, as we get into tonight's episode, I wanted to kind of give you a little background, a little precursor of what we're doing tonight. We've had a handful of listeners, actually a couple of handfuls of listeners, who have asked about deliverance ministry and what it's like to be somebody who does this for a living. And I think that exists because there's a lot of stereotypes as well as just kind of preconceived notions that people who do deliverance ministry are kind of odd ducks, maybe, or they are so religious and astutely, pursuing, demons on a 24-hour basis. But I don't think that's true. I think anybody who does deliverance ministry is just a normal person who has heeded a calling and inserts that as part of their global ministry. And so somebody like me who was in ministry full time for a while of my life, for a pretty big portion of my life, I am somebody who did many ministries, but deliverance just happened to fall into one of those subcategories of ministry. And it wasn't often that it occurred. Now, some churches and some ministries are very focused on deliverance. I never worked within a church structure like that. Deliverance just kind of came as an as needed basis. But I will say that most of the deliverance ministry that I've done in my life has been word of mouth outside of the church or more as a parachurch ministry. So, with that being said, I wanted to get to this interview today. And this is somebody who I feel would be an amazing person to answer the question of what it's like to maybe understand the day to days of a deliverance minister. And so, our guest tonight on this podcast is my fiance, Melissa. Now, Melissa and I have been talking about this for a while. And when this topic came up, she agreed that she would go on the podcast and try to give an explanation of who we are, who I am, and maybe attest to the fact that I'm not some extravagant kind of weird guy who only thinks about fighting demons 24/7. So we want to have some fun tonight and we want to, just kind of maybe get a little intimate in terms of who I am, who we are, and kind of the day-to-days in the background of this podcast. So I would like to introduce to you my fiance, Melissa. How are you doing today, Melissa?
I'm great, Anthony. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I think, you're, the most extroverted person I know, but I know there's a little nervousness to you. So I would just tell you we're just gonna go through the basics, and because you've heard every episode maybe in triplicate and you know kind of what we do here, I always just ask for a brief background. And so let's just start out by humanizing you a little bit. Tell us what you're about. Tell us what you like. What are your day-to-days? What are you into?
I am a Florida native. I moved here about 10 years ago. Absolutely love it. I love hiking. I love taking my dogs to the dog park. I love zip lining, top golf, axe throwing. Actually, we took your family a few weeks ago for their birthdays, and I think we all had a great time. And I think I won a couple of rounds.
Of course you had brought that up.
I enjoy crafts. When I lived in Florida, I had a booth at the flea market where I would make Mother's Day basket, baby shower basket, Father's Day baskets. I made really good money, so I enjoy working with my hands. I love music, including jazz, R&B, country, pop, and Christian rock. I love listening to K-Love. I listen to it every morning on my way to work, and I sing in the car and make faces all loud as if I'm singing on the stage and everyone's watching me. And if I'm stopping at when I stop at a stop sign, and if someone's looking at me like, "What is this lady? It must be her song." And I'll just turn around and just smile and wave and say good morning. Um, and I actually am learning how to play the guitar, which you bought me a guitar for Christmas. So thank you. And it's been a lot of fun playing the guitar with you. And actually, your youngest daughter, she plays the guitar as well. And I actually wrote a song. I was going to play it for you tonight, but I forgot to grab the guitar before we started. But the name of the song is Jenna is a Good Girl. It's for our smallest dog. She's a sweetheart.
So again, as the audience gets to know you, Melissa is the single most extroverted person I've ever met, and I bought her this guitar for Christmas, and she before she even knew a chord, just started strumming the guitar and wrote a song for our little dog, and, she is definitely not shy about it, and I would just say that, you definitely missed out by not having her rendition of the Jenna song on the podcast. But what I wanna know, is a little bit about your spiritual journey. So, I think that's very important because, again, we're trying to normalize who we are, and, we could have brought the other team members on the podcast, but I think you're the one that knows me the best. So, what is your spiritual journey? Tell us about, when you met Jesus and go from there.
After listening to a few of your episodes before we decided to do this episode on the podcast, I rewrote my notes and I thought about how your other um, guests described their journey. So I thought I would just be transparent. So I grew up, have six siblings, um, kind of neglected as a child. Um, my mother was really not involved in our church life. She would get us dressed, feed us breakfast, take us to church, drop us off, and then come back and pick us up when church was over. And that went on throughout my entire childhood. But at least she did, take us to church and so we would have that church experience, at least some knowledge of God and, going to Bible study and revivals and things like that. And then one day I was at church, and when the pastor said, "Does anyone would like to come up to the altar to be prayed for if you have anything that you're struggling with, to come up to the altar." And people would go up to the altar and say what they're struggling with and ask for prayer. And I didn't understand what was happening. And then one day I went up to the pastor and I asked him, I said, "If I get baptized, will God love me like you always say that God loves all of his children? Because my mother really doesn't love me and she doesn't protect us." And my pastor was about 6'2" when I was only maybe 10 years old. So he kneeled down and he prayed with me. And I remember this to this day. And he did say yes. He didn't hesitate to judge my mother or to judge me on me asking that question as a 10-year-old. And so he prayed with me. And I remember to this day that he said that, yes, God loves me, God loves all of his children, and that God would always be with me. And I feel even to this day that God has been with me through the peaks and the valleys, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I was baptized at 10 years old. And then as I got older, graduated from high school, went to college, got married, got a divorce, and been married once. I was married for 13 years. And one day I was at work and my coworker, there was a new church that opened and everyone was talking about it, how great it was. It was a younger pastor, just very great, very welcoming church. And so she asked me one day, she said, "Hey, would you like to come to church with me?" I said, "Of course." So I went to church. As soon as I stepped into the church, I just felt welcome and the love and everyone was welcome. It wasn't anything like what you had on or what kind of car you drove. It was just everyone was welcome. You could come in jeans if that's all you had, or a sundress or flip flops. They didn't care. They welcomed everyone. And it was all different types of domination, nationalities. It was just great. And so started going to church there, did some volunteer work. And then after um, being involved in the church for about 6 months, I was baptized there and saved on June 9th, 2009.
Well, and I appreciate the details of that, and you're correct, we did kinda talk about, how we normally kind of interview, and so I appreciate you being that bold and that, you know, forthcoming because I think it helps the audience to really understand who you are. In my case, my story was written in my first book, so a lot of people who listen to this podcast know that my first book called The Struggle, the first couple of chapters actually outline my childhood. There's a little bit of fiction in there, but most of it is true. And then, of course, the books from there become mostly fiction with little bits of truth. But the first two chapters are my story. But for people to know you, I appreciate the boldness of you saying that because what we want to get across here is that we're normal people. We're not these perfect Christian people by any means, and that we've had our ups and downs. And so I appreciate you sharing so intimately your spiritual journey. Now, as we kind of have some fun with this, Melissa, I want you to kind of tell us what were your thoughts or what were your even conceptions of deliverance ministry before you met me?
Well, honestly, I really didn't know that much about it, other than I would make a reference to The Exorcist type of movies, like where there's people that are possessed with demons, and you do exorcisms and get the demons out of them. But I know that there are people, that God has chosen to have that gift. And my first reaction was that's exciting, but kinda scary, and I wouldn't want that gift. I wouldn't wanna see some of the things that you told me that you have seen and some of the experiences that you've had, but you've also have used your, gift to help people and, to get those demons out of them. So it's exciting, it's scary at the same time.
So I Melissa hates when I use this term, but it's what I use and we kind of joke around about it. But the topic is pretty weird. And so it's an odd topic. It's not, if you're sitting at a social gathering, you don't just walk up and say, so tell me what you know about deliverance ministry. It's like it's a very obscure topic, maybe is a good word. And so when do you remember me talking about deliverance, or was it when you read my first book or my first two books, or When do you remember me first bringing it up as a topic?
I think it was maybe after our maybe a month, maybe 3rd week after dating, and after reading your first book, I think we really talked about it, and, you explained it to me and how long you've been doing it and what it was really all about, so I understand it more than I did when I first when you and I first had the conversation.
And did you think it was weird? Honestly, did you think like, "Oh my gosh, what's this weirdo talking about?" What was that?
I did think it was weird, but I didn't want to make you uncomfortable because you were or are so sure about it and so comfortable with it, and your knowledge about it didn't make it as weird.
And I think as you listeners kind of hear this, I want you to think even within yourselves because many people who listen to a podcast like this are believers in the demonic. They You probably have had some sort of experience that basically affords you the belief in it. You can't afford not to believe, maybe is a better way to put it. So you listen because it's a topic that is close to you. You've had some experience or somebody you know had an experience. But again, there are a lot of people in the world that think this is crazy. You've heard me reference in the last handful of episodes about people, referencing us as, believing in fairy tales, sky daddy. I was actually listening to a preacher today and just kind of in the background as I was doing some editing, and he was talking about during his Easter service how he gets a lot of correspondence where people are talking about his sky daddy. And so we hear those jokes because people don't take this topic seriously. So just know that even Melissa, even though she wasn't opposed to the topic, we do understand that somebody who has this kind of pursuit of education as well as, you know, um being devoted to this type of ministry, we do recognize that it is out of the norm. And so I appreciate your honesty, Melissa. Now, what I want you to do is maybe make this a little more normal in terms of your experiences. And I know we've talked and you don't have a ton, but tell us what any paranormal experiences that you've had or things that you remember that would fall into the paranormal category.
I have a few. There's one that I remember. Actually, you and I were together, and your mom and your youngest daughter. We were out looking at model homes, and it was, I guess, that when the season had changed or the time had changed. So it was around 5:15, 5:30, just as it was getting dark. And I think they closed at 5. So we were leaving the model homes, and as we were leaving, I saw this light. It was almost maybe about the size of a tennis ball, and it was just very bright, and then all of a sudden, it just shot across in front of me, and it went in the middle of the model homes, and it stopped me in my steps, and I wasn't sure if anyone else had saw it, and then I think when I stopped, either I said, "Did you see that?" And then you said, "Yeah, I saw it. I just wanted to see if you saw it." And I asked, your mom and your daughter if they saw it, and they were like, look on their phone or not paying attention or looking at something else. But it threw me off, and it just happened so fast, and I wasn't sure what I was seeing.
That story for me is one that is kind of pivotal in our relationship because again, here's you've dated me for a while at that time, but you are hearing me talk about these things and yet, you don't really, if I say I saw this or saw that, you know, you could just be on the list of people that think I'm nuts. But when this thing, and I saw it as it was a much bigger entity and it had kind of dissipated down to a small ball of light when you saw it. But I saw it come from our left to our right, and you kind of saw it as it was already going to your right because I was just a couple steps behind you. But when I saw your reaction, there was something in me that said, "Well, thank God now I don't have to walk around wondering if she thinks I'm crazy." Because when we turned around, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" For me, it was like a relief because it's like, okay, now you understand what I deal with. Now, I want to kind of clarify before we get to your other stories here, but there are a lot of people that will perform deliverance ministry that don't really have a humongous gift of discernment. And I it's a gift, but sometimes I consider it a curse because I've been able to see demons since I was a very young child, and I see them often. Most people would say, well, how often? I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times a day in different capacities. So for you to only see something once and
Mhm.
be sure that it wasn't anything but some sort of an entity was good for me, and it kind of gives you empathy for me knowing that, wow, if he has to see these things all the time, that's crazy. So
Mhm.
again, as you're listening, just remember that these things are everywhere. They're not in our vision because God has, I would believe, purposely only allowed us to see into this realm, and some of us get glimpses into the spiritual realm. And I would say that even though I may have a bigger view into that realm, I'm still very shielded because I'm sure if we could see fully into that realm, it would probably drive us insane. So to just see glimpses is bad enough. So, but anyway, continue on with your story.
And there was another um experience that I had, and I was at one of my friend's house, and which I would go there on a regular basis, and they had a huge bay window in their backyard, and they had these beautiful trees with these beautiful flowers. I mean, from purple to reds and oranges and blues, just gorgeous garden. And it was just absolutely gorgeous. So you can see the whole backyard through the bay window. And I remember on a few occasions, I would see this lady standing in the garden, and I thought it was just one of the neighbors because they didn't have a fence on the back end of the yard, only on the sides of the yard. And I didn't think anything of it because I saw her just as clear as day. And a few weeks later, maybe a month later, I can't remember. It kind of all makes sense now, but we were watching a movie. So we were all sitting around the living room watching a movie, and I was sitting on the edge of the sofa. And all of a sudden, I saw this lady walk from where my friend's parents' bedroom was located across to the bathroom in the hallway. And the room just got really cold, like as she walked by, and it was like chilling cold, like ice cold, like I just stepped into a freezer. And it only lasts for maybe a few seconds, 30 seconds or so. And then I asked him, I said, "Oh, I said, who is that?" And they're like, "Who?" I said, "The lady just walked from your room to the bathroom in the hallway." And he said, "Oh, did you see her?" The youngest son said, "Oh, did you see her?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Who is it?" He said, "That's my grandmother." And I said, "Oh, I thought your grandmother passed away a long time ago." He said, "Oh, yeah, but she comes around every now and then." And I was totally shocked. I didn't know what to do. It didn't scare me, but I could not believe what I just saw. And I described her exactly what she had on, her hair, the clothes, what she looked like. And then the mother got up and went into the bedroom, and she brought out a picture that she had of her on her dresser of the person that I saw, and she had on the same clothes in the photo. And it was just I'm still baffled that I even saw that, and it makes you second guess, like, did I really see that? Like, that can't be real. And so that was a lady that was in the garden. That was her pride and joy, was keeping that yard up and keeping the flowers trimmed and make sure the neighbors would just come over and just, "Oh, these flowers are just so beautiful." And then come to find out, she passed away in that house. And then the father said, "Oh, yeah, I have breakfast with her sometimes. We just sit down and we chit chat." And I didn't know what to say.
Yeah, and when you told me that story the first time, it it prompted a conversation with us about my beliefs on ghosts. But, the story in and of itself, I love because, when we do this type of, conversations about paranormal, the skeptics always come out of the woodwork. But the real, I guess, defense of skepticism is witnesses. And so for you to see somebody that nobody had described to you, and then you bring it up and they say, "Oh, you're talking about this person." And then they even show you a photo and then tell stories of what they've seen. That's not faked. There's something there. Now, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole in this podcast, but you know, my beliefs are very, very limited, I guess, maybe on ghosts because I'm not sure there really are a lot of ghosts. I think more often than not, they're demons that are representing themselves to be people because they've been around for a while and they understand. Now, if this gentleman's having breakfast with his mother, um, there's a question that would arise as to why are they keeping her here or why is she still here? But nonetheless, very, very big paranormal story that I think, has a lot of weight to it. Is there any other things that you've had?
You may find this silly, but I'm gonna just tell this story. So, and this is the main reason that I do not like going antique shopping. I do not like old furniture. I don't want anything out of anyone's house that's old mirrors, old jewelry, old cabinets. I don't want any of it. So one day I was walking my dog and he found a ball and he was playing with it and he brought the ball back home with him and I thought, "Okay, no problem." And so it was kind of dirty, so I did wash it and because I don't want my dog having a dirty toy that we found outside. So I did clean it and I just put it in his toy box. And then a few days later, he was taking his toys out of his toy box and he was playing with that ball. And he started playing with the ball, and then all of a sudden, he just stopped, and he looked up at the loft, and he just dropped the ball, and then he whimpered, and then he went to the door in the corner and just curled up like in a ball, and I looked up, of course, to see what he was looking at. I mean, it was like he was just frozen, and I looked up at the loft to see what he was looking at, and, of course, I didn't see anything. And then he was just in a corner and I went over and I petted him, make sure he was okay. But he stayed in that corner for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I gave him a treat. Of course, that's his weakness is a treat.
That's for sure.
And then I would say maybe a few days later, kind of the same episode happened. He was playing with the toy and he looked up at the loft and he made the same whimpering sound and he went into at the door, curled up in the ball. And then remembered, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot that like these things can follow you home." Like I enjoy looking at some of the ghost hunting stories, but I would never go because I wouldn't want to bring any of those things back home with me. And so the next day I threw the ball in the trash can and he's never done that before
Just for the record, I
ever
don't
since.
I don't think that's crazy at all. There's so much evidence that, spirits can attach to objects or at least use them as a point of contact. Again, we can go down a huge theological rabbit trail, and we don't want to do that for this episode because we're trying to keep it pretty light. But there is a ton of evidence, I would say, and definitely a ton of research that's been done about entities attaching to objects or at least using them as a point of contact. I'll tell you a quick story one time. Just so you kind of have because I know you kind of thought maybe I wouldn't believe the story, but and there's plenty of corroborating witnesses for this, probably 20. But one of the counseling agencies that I owned, it was in a smaller town, but we had 5 locations. So I would bounce around from location to location throughout the day just to kind of oversee the business as well as I would see patients, within the businesses. Well, one of my staff members actually found a Bible out in the parking lot and it was dusty. So it looks like maybe it was buried or maybe it had had some weather on it, and then it was there. So we actually brought it in thinking that if somebody left it out in the rain, maybe a couple nights ago or something like that, that they might come back looking for it. Well, the staff began to say that they were experiencing a bunch of paranormal activity in the office. So this isn't a home. This is a very clinical, I would say antiseptic type building. It used to be a women's uh like a women's clinic before we took it over. So there
Mhm.
wasn't, a big, I guess paranormal history on it.
History.
But so much so that one day I saw the Bible sitting on the shelf, and I said to myself, "I guess I'm gonna have to throw that away because everybody's afraid of it. They're attributing it to the Bible." And as I walked up the stairs right past it, as I wasn't saying it out loud, I was saying it in my head, I literally felt an electric shock touch the top of my head, and I turned and saw the electric, like the arc, like a little lightning bolt go from my head as it, like, dissipated from my head and went into the wall. And so my first instinct was is there was some sort of a short. So maybe, like, there was a wire that ran under the step and maybe there
Mhm.
was wet, but
Right.
the more we
Mhm.
looked, there was no electricity on that part of the building. There wasn't even an outlet. And we got rid of the Bible and all the activity went away. So I believe in that stuff. So, and, Melissa's keen to a lot of the people that worked for me in my previous career as a therapist. So we'll confirm that story down the road. Now, what I want to do, before we get too far down that rabbit trail again is, since meeting me, what has changed about your thoughts on demons, spiritual warfare, deliverance ministry, etc.?
Oh, you're asking some hard questions. Wasn't ready for all of this. I've learned a lot just about deliverance in general and how it works and how it can attack people, that are struggling with depression, lost of spirit, desire, and just doubting God and just the negativity, throughout life, just the way that this world has changed. Um, and just your knowledge of the Bible, and I'm learning more about the Bible and understanding it more. So it's just been a great experience so far, and I'm looking forward to learning more.
Good. So you
I
don't
hope that
think I'm
wasn't a
as crazy? Is that
not
what you're
as
saying?
crazy. Crazy fun.
Okay, before we kind of kind of go down a couple of different more specific trails here. Tell me about any familial spirits that you can think of in your past, because one of the topics we cover a lot here is that demons, a lot of them have been attached to our families through curses, or they've been assigned to our families and they've stuck around. And so tell me a little bit about your thoughts on familial spirits or familiar spirits, depending on whose terminology you want to use.
I do, actually, for my family, I have 6 siblings, and we did not have a very good childhood. I mean, thank God for when it says it takes a village to raise a family. That is so true with other family members reaching out. And I'm not saying I don't wanna bash my mother, but, she had her issues, and I think she either has some demons on her or a family curse that was sent, that was what's the word? Sent down to us, or the generation was transferred to us. Um, that, alcoholism and really not, um, spending time with your family. My all 3 of my brothers, they have children, and they make sure that they were a father, and a positive father, to all their children, and make sure that they had what they needed, the love and the support, and believing, if they tell them something is going on, that they believe them, and just to stop that family curse of, the drinking and the partying, and, just be a more positive person. So I think we all came together as a family and decided, "Hey, this curse stops here." So I'm so thankful and so proud of my nieces and nephews that are doing great. They're in their 30s now. Oh my gosh, that's telling my age, but I'm really happy. I got my AARP card magazine today, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, you're giving away both of our ages
Ages.
now.
But I'm just happy that we recognize it and so to stop that curse, and it can be broken, that you just have to break that cycle. And so this next generation and then their generation, won't have, hopefully, pray the same issues and struggles that we had growing up.
So when you think about like some of the things that we do, we watch comedy movies together, so on and so forth. But there are times where either you will join me or I'm watching paranormal shows, and I want to give some clarity here. Paranormal programming is not, you know, n- it's not always accepted by the Christian community. There's a lot of ministers that would say we should never, excuse me, we should never watch programs like this because it could be a doorway to demons. And I don't disagree with that, but I am constantly searching, doing a lot of research as well as understanding kind of the the what people are into nowadays. And so a lot of the paranormal programming that we watch, I'm doing research for some of the bonus episodes, etc. Um, and you said that you're not really a super, you weren't really a super fan of that and you don't really watch a lot of that. But what are your thoughts on, since you've been with me on some of the programs that you've watched or some of the, even research programs I was looking at that you probably would have never watched on your own? What have you gathered from that?
Well, I really enjoy the stories that you post on the, oh, what is it called when you tell the stories?
Patreon.
The Patreon, about the Sally House, for an example. I remember that. So it just the way that it's real, that it does happen. And so I do enjoy, watching the shows with you and like learning a lot. It's kind of exciting, kind of scary at the same time, but I think for me, I I'm really not that involved in it. Like I don't really play with Ouija boards. I've never have. I don't look in the mirror and try to do any curses or try to do any spells or anything just to see what would happen. So I believe that it's real. So I most definitely stay away from that part of it. But to me, it's more of an entertainment. But to do when you're doing your research and the information that they have to back up the stories and the evidence is really impressive, and it's kind of shocking at the same time that these things really do happen.
Yeah, and again, there is a fine line. I don't ever push Melissa to watch, anything because some of the things I watch can be pretty dark. And, we always want to pray if we are doing stuff like that. We always want to pray. But I think the
Mhm.
main thing is to not be obsessed. Because if you start becoming obsessed where you are, even as a believer, you start to believe more in the ghost hunters and their
Mhm.
philosophies than you do in the Bible. I think you've gone down the wrong path. Also, some of the extreme demonic programs that there are where they're just so graphic and so demonic. You really want to be prayed up if you're watching that stuff at all. Now, again, some of you listening may say, "Well, what a hypocrite. He's telling us not to do it, but he does." But let me kind of give you a little bit of background, and this is kind of going on a little tangent, but bear with me here. So, once upon a time, as I, am not working in ministry, not working as a therapist, just, kind of on this season of life that I'm in now, I still had a restless soul because when you work with people so much and then all of a sudden you go to not working with people, you get to a place where you feel like what else should I be doing? And I've done a lot of things. I've been a college professor, a therapist, a minister, kind of worked in different capacities with tons of different clientele, different churches, so on and so forth. So I had some time on my hands, and so I decided to write this little trilogy of books. And I actually had this concept on my spirit for a while, but I kept talking myself out of it because of all of the feedback from the Christians of my life. Because they said, "Well, what do you want to write about?" And I said, "I want to write a Christian horror novel." And see, even Melissa chuckled as I say that because that seems like an oxymoron, right? That seems like those two things don't exist. But that was a season of my life. And this was a handful of years back. The first book was released in 2019, so they were written. I actually wrote all three of them in 2018 in a pretty short period of time. All three books just flowed out of me because they were in me for a while. But this is at the height of all the paranormal programming. There was at a time where the Travel Channel was a joke name because the Travel Channel, and I think probably still is all paranormal shows. So it wasn't about travel. Every single show, every single hour was a paranormal show. And I started to see a lot of these ghost hunters would sometimes find an evil spirit. They would call it an evil spirit. They were very, very reluctant to call him a demon. Some people would, but they would have no solution. So you go to somebody's house, you do all this provocation, you rile up this spirit, and then you say, "Yeah, you got something. Here's a couple EVPs and here's a couple videos. Good luck." And people were searching. And then I realized this is a season of life where people are searching for spiritual answers. That's why the paranormal, even now, it's dissipated a little bit, but even now, it's still like probably one of the biggest genres on TV because people are thirsty and hungry for spiritual knowledge. And if there is an afterlife, they want evidence of it because they're trying to make sense of their real life by understanding that there's something on the other side. And so I said to myself, you've always been a pastor who wants to reach a group of people that are not church people. And if you haven't known a lot about me to this point, I'm a rebel. When I worked in churches, I was in trouble all the time because religion drives me nuts. I just want people to know Jesus. Man made rules drive me crazy. And so I've always been somebody who, and this term came to me from some of my mentors, people that are deemed unlovable, which are kind of the modern day lepers. That's who I want to reach. That's who I want to hang around with. I would rather hang around with, a homeless guy that's, you know, got some substance abuse issues than a person who's been going to church for 65 of their 65 years on planet Earth and wants to argue, where the Hebrew, translation means this. Not that that stuff's not important and not that I haven't studied it, but I just don't have time for that. If people will just meet Jesus, them and Jesus will do they'll build a relationship. They don't need me. If I do the introduction, then I can move on. Discipleship is important, don't get me wrong, but you get what I'm saying. So, I wrote these books to reach a group of people that are horror fanatics for them to hear a gospel message. And so if you have read The Struggle or The Sacrifice, which are the two of the three books that have been released, you will know that there's a huge gospel message in these books. It's very unique. Some people have equated it a little bit to Frank Peretti's work, and definitely that's one of my heroes, my literary heroes, but it's different. He speaks of angels and demons, but he doesn't write horror novels. He just writes, spiritual warfare novels. These are horror novels. And the purpose of that was to reach people who would never, if you said I wrote a Christian book, they would never read it. And so because my favorite genres are horror, detective novels, and Christian literary, works of all kinds, I merged all 3. So these books are there to reach a group of people, and I've been blessed enough over the last handful of years to receive tons of correspondence from people who have read the books and given their life over to Jesus. That's all I ever wanted. If one person did that, you know, I felt like I served my purpose. Now, people would argue and say, God didn't put that on your heart, that was you. And, I don't have time for that argument. I believe God did. And I bring all this up because as Melissa and I have always wrestled with this topic of, how much paranormal programming we watch versus, not letting it be an invitation for spirits to mess with us. It is a balance, but keep in mind that there is a gospel message to this. If people believe there's demons, then they have to believe there's God. And
Mhm.
if there's a God, that God is the one that can save them from the demons. And because we live in this crazy world, that's the whole purpose of this podcast. And by the way, just a quick, maybe somewhat promotional little push, even though it's the beginning stages. I've decided to, on a separate podcast, release the books on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you read your books, and they'll eventually make their way to my YouTube and Rumble channels as well with a little bit of video. My podcast is on YouTube and Rumble, but there's no real video. It's just the audio with some pictures. But I want to eventually at least, put those stories out there with a little bit of visual content as well. But you can read those books, but you can listen to them for free where you listen to this podcast, and you could find them by just searching the struggle series and then looking for the same logo that's on this podcast. And you'll see, because I use the cover art from book one called The Struggle for the cover art for Freedom from the Struggle podcast. So if you just kind of see that same blue and black picture of a house with a little girl standing in the window and a minister standing in front of the house, you will then know that you're in the right place. So there's a handful of chapters that are already released, and we'll be releasing those maybe one or two, uh, at least a few a week until the first book is done. And then the second book, called The Sacrifice, will start shortly after. And we'll continue to give those updates. But I wanted to kind of go down that rabbit trail just for a second because this concept of spiritual warfare is why we exist here. And, as Melissa has gotten to know me and seen the passion in me for this, I think it goes back to what she was saying at the beginning when she was very transparent about her journey, about her spiritual life, because these entities are constantly messing with us. They are constantly in kind of a planning or plotting mode to tear us apart. And so we are here as these normal people, and Melissa will attest, we go play top golf and throw axes. And I even threw some pictures on the social medias of our dogs. There was some on there already, but literally I threw some more on there for this podcast. So you can see that we have a little princess dog in a dress and a pit bull chocolate lab mix that just begs for food all day. We laugh. My youngest daughter is going to be graduating from high school this year. We're just normal people. The difference is that we're willing to go get in the mud with people and help them find their way out of these spiritual battles. When you storm the gates of hell and you pick fights with demons, you have paranormal experiences and activity. And, we will oftentimes notice that, I and Melissa will even attest to this, and she didn't put it in her stories, but you can almost tell when we're gonna have an episode, or somebody's gonna write in on a letter we're gonna use in an episode, because the demons start attacking us. They start to, things start going
Mhm.
wrong a little bit. You start hearing maybe something in the house. You start to, notice that the dogs are acting a little creepy or whatever. And so this is a real battle. And I'm saying all that to say you're not alone. There are people out there that will listen to this podcast and say, "That's happened to me." And some of those people would say they have reached out for help and were mocked, ridiculed,
Mhm.
minimized, and we're not gonna do that here. I suspend all disbelief. Now, I have had some correspondence with people who I think were horsing around or maybe the mental illness was so high that, it was obvious that there was not really a lot of help we could offer them, but we still gave referrals for those people. But if you are somebody who struggled with that, just know that that's what we're here for. We are not like, I guess I kinda wanna just over exaggerate this, but we don't wake up in the morning and, like, I don't, put a shield and a sword on my belt and walk out the door and say, "Okay, demons, today's the day you die." It's not about that. Most of these spiritual battles are fought in a much less dramatic fashion than The Exorcist, like Melissa said. Most of these are battles people are fighting with spirits of alcoholism or addiction, spirits of depression,
Mhm.
spirits of, anxiety, spirits of, you know, it, like rage and jealousy and things like that. Very few people actually get to a place where they're possessed to a point where they are out of control, super strength, knowing, things about you that they shouldn't know, all of the tests of what a true possession is. A
Mhm.
lot of the battles we fight are a lot more subtle, which means some of you may not realize that's what you're going through. If you're somebody who used to be very happy and now you're kind of negative and you kind of seem stuck and you don't know why, maybe you've even gone to the doctor and you don't meet the criteria for clinical depression. I'm going to tell you something. You're probably being oppressed by a spirit. You probably have something attached to you
Mhm.
that you need to pray away. And people will put these things on you. If you want a crazy paranormal story, I could tell you that the bonus episode, this airs on a Wednesday, the one for the following Friday, which I think would be the 5th, if I'm not mistaken, of April of 2024, depending on when you're listening to this. The bonus episode, I was asked to tell the most terrifying paranormal story of my life. I told that story, and you can listen to that. There's even a free 7-day trial if you just want to listen to it and cancel your membership. But please call in with those if you have them. We'll put them on the air, but most of the things we deal with are more subtle. And just know that there's normal people here doing normal things. We are praying for people like you who to find the help you need and to find Jesus. And so that's what we're about here. Now, Melissa, I've kind of rattled on there for a second. I just kind of have one more question before we do some wrap up. What are your thoughts on this podcast or your thoughts on maybe some of the episodes that you've heard or just your overall thoughts on what we do here?
Well, I'm really proud of you, and I'm really happy that you decided to move forward with the podcast. I think that you are helping a lot of people, and I'm really enjoying listening to, your guests and the letters that have been written in, and it's just amazing how people can open up, and the struggles that they have, and I've had some of the few. I've had depression, I've had anxiety, I've had to, learn how to forgive people and had to learn how to let things go. And that's what the devil wants. That's what the demons want. They want you to hold on to that negativity. And I think maybe sometimes we hold on to it for so long that we don't know how to live without it. But you can let it go and it can be replaced with love, and happiness and joy in your life. And there's several episodes that I've listened to, like some of the people that, actually did the podcast, like I guess live. And I do apologize if I'm stumbling. I get kind of nervous. Feels like I'm on display. No, not display, but just kind of nervous, like being vulnerable and, telling your story. And I can relate, to several, of the guests have had, that has called in and, decided to tell their stories. And So I'm just happy and I'm glad to be with you through this process. And, I hope that we are able to reach hundreds and thousands of people. We're not in it for the money by any means, but this is a lot of work. You spend hours doing the research, hours talking to people, doing the editing, your books and everything. So it's basically a full time job, even though you have a full time job and another full time job. But I'm just so proud of you, and I'm just happy that you invited me to be here with you and, just moving forward. So hopefully you'll have me again, and maybe I'll tell another story.
Okay, so real quick question. If I got a call tonight that said, "My daughter's possessed, she's levitating off the bed," would you go with me?
No. Call me when you're on your way home.
Well, we see just how far Melissa's help will go. Just kidding. So again, I want to thank you so much for listening to this podcast. The purpose of this episode again was just to have a little bit of fun, but more importantly to normalize this. And I just want to clarify that the reason for that is we get so much correspondence and a lot of it, can be negative, you guys are weirdos or whatever. I mean, you would be astonished at the disgusting vulgar things that get sent to us. Wouldn't you, Melissa?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's insane. It's
It's evil.
unbelievable. It is very evil.
But a lot of people say like, "Is this all you do? Do you do other things?" Listen, if it were up to me, we would just talk about Jesus. But we all have to kind of find our little place in life, and at this season of life, this is what God wants me to do. And
Mhm.
again, I will say it, the world is in a very, very dark place. I believe and would very strongly be able to back that up with some time and conversation with you that we are in the last days, that there's an antichrist spirit that's on the earth now, and things might get a lot worse than you can even imagine now. But evil has become good and good has become evil. I was just watching a video earlier this week where a man was talking about the rapture and how God is going to rapture us before the tribulation. And a woman starts screaming in the back, calling him a liar, but it was a demonic scream.
Mhm.
And this minister actually jumped off the stage and went and prayed the demon out of this woman, him and his team, right in a church service. Now, a bystander would say that all she was doing was disputing the fact that he's pre-trib, not mid-trib or post-trib. But if you watch the video, you can hear her screaming, it's
Mhm.
demonic. I watched another video today where a woman is at a store and the she stole from the store the previous day, and if she, came back the next day, I think it was, why would you do that? But she had come back the very next day and the store recognized her and called the police, and she is screaming at these people who are the cops who are trying to arrest her, and she's saying these outlandish things, and I think the caption on the video and I think we reposted these to our TikTok account, um, I have a team that does that, so I'm pretty sure they reposted all of those. So you can go and find them at Anthony Corelli's TikTok. But she the caption said that she's mentally ill and they shouldn't have closed the asylums. And I just shook my head because I believe in mental illness. I'm a therapist. I have a PhD in psychology, but that's not mental illness. That's demonic. If you heard what she was saying, she told the cop that she was going to kill her and eat her ashes. She was gonna burn her alive or something like that and eat her ashes. And she eventually gets arrested and the video ends. But this is the times we live in. People are debating right now what they're calling Christian nationalism. A true Christian nationalist believes that there wouldn't be no any government, that there would just be the church would run the government. That's not what Christians are in this country. There might be a few of those. That's what Christian nationalism truly is. But the politicians in the world is starting to come up with this term calling all Christians Christian nationalists. We don't want the church to run the government. We want the government to be small and run the government and the church to run the church, but not the government telling us what we can worship and who we can't. That's the evil that we live in. And my encouragement to you is look at the world you live in. Look at the things that you've seen that 20 years ago would not only not be acceptable, they would be unfathomable. Think of the violence, the theft, the acceptance of right and wrong, the criminal justice system being so broken that people could commit heinous crimes and be let out with no bail to commit more crimes. And we're not trying to be political. I'm just trying to give you the evil that's in the world. It's not hiding anymore. And so, as a family here at Freedom from the Struggle, and I don't mean just the family behind this microphone, I mean the family of listeners of what I would say our little army that we're trying to grow here. We have to be praying for ourselves and for each other and for the world, for our government, for our leaders, because I believe there's some scary times ahead. And I don't want to be somebody who wasn't making every effort I could to try to help people find Jesus. And I would encourage you to seek yourself and kind of see whether God is putting that on your heart as well. I'm going to kind of close with this as we go. You know, next week's letter that we're already working on is one that is very, very sad. It's very, very disturbing and broken. It speaks a lot of some ritualistic abuse, and it's going to be pretty graphic. I'm still kind of weighing my options of if I'm going to read it verbatim or if I might leave some of it out. And I'm not afraid of controversy. I'm not afraid of even kind of little bit of graphic stuff, but it's just so heartbreaking. And the fact that this person could live within a society where this is going on with through her childhood, through her teens, and nobody knew. And when she reached out for help, nobody believed her. That's the world we live in. And so we are just real people with a real heart for the lost and for people who are in the midst of spiritual warfare. So that's what we're about here. And so as we move forward with this season, I just wanted this little bookmark, if you will. My fiance, Melissa, is a normal person who walks her dog, I don't know, countless miles. I walk the little dog like, up to the grass to go to the bathroom and come back, but she walks that pit bull for miles and miles at a time. She's just a normal person. She's like the mayor of our little community. She is a normal person who is married to what I or is getting married to a I would say pretty normal guy, although he does deliverance ministry sometimes.
It's still normal.
Yeah, we are here to help you. Thanks again for joining us. Just some reminders. If you can like, subscribe, hit the bells, the reminders, leave us a positive review if you can. We are on Rumble and YouTube with the audio only. If you prefer to listen to us there, remember that word of mouth is always the best way for us to not only grow the podcast, but to reach out to the people who might need help. So if you can just refer this to a friend, we greatly appreciate it. Quick reminder, patreon.com/freedom from the struggle will get you to where you can listen to the bonus episodes if you're into that. And I always say, this isn't about money. There's a couple of levels there. There's a smaller level that will help you just to sponsor the podcast, some of the expenses we have. And then at the $5 level, you can listen to the bonus episodes, but there is a 7-day free trial. There's about 9 episodes on there now, bonus episodes where you can learn about, you know, deliverance ministry by putting it in view of some of the, more well-known hauntings and possessions, in our culture. So thanks again for listening. I pray that God blesses you and keeps you this week. We'll see you next time.